This is called a jump snipe using jump drives. It's one of the most deadly tactics in Stellaris, because if you see this happening and are not prepared to react immediately, you're already dead, as any hesitation means you'll likely miss the very narrow timing to prevent disaster. Jump drives are essentially normal drives with the unique ability to completely bypass hyperlanes. But do be careful, the penalties after a jump are massive, so directly jumping into an enemy fleet is not advised, though nobody's stopping you from jumping directly into their economies instead, which leads us to their uncanny ability to break the age-old death stack meta by simply bypassing hyperlanes. Usually, the objective of war is to take down the economy, bankrupt them, and stop reinforcements. This can be done after you destroy enough ships to make this process easier, as enemy ships will likely block any paths to the economy. But with jump drives, you can simply bypass any blockades and just go in. There is no need to destroy enemy ships, as the only thing left between you and the economy is a game of reactions. If the enemy has jump drives and are doing this to you, it would likely demand a counter jump immediately at that very moment, which can be a very big problem, since the place where your ship's jump tunnel will come out is completely predictable, as the angle the jump comes from is determined from where it comes from in the galaxy view. This can be exploited to force a hard counter situation no matter what, as the battle start positions are determined by the one that jumps first. Although this can be somewhat alleviated using battle tactics in the combat master classes, it's still generally better to react faster than to react accurately.
That's the wrong button, no!
In other words, you're forced to enter a situation where one screw up means you're likely gonna lose both your economy and fleets. For example, both sides have jump drives, but an imbalance in ship designs. One has slow torpedo cruisers and the other has fast artillery battleships. In any other scenario, the slow torpedo ships would have been kited to death way before landing any torpedoes. But if the torpedo fleets initiates a jump snipe first and positions themselves in the place where the enemy jump tunnel would appear, it would result in a situation where if the enemy dares to counter jump, they would suffer the double penalty of not being able to shoot close range targets and getting blasted by torpedoes up front. Keep in mind that in this scenario, since both sides are jump exhausted, this factor is also pretty much null and void. Now, how do you actually stop this? Well, very simple. It's just that you don't have much time. First, you need to find any small ship in jump range. It could be anything, even armies to send first as a sacrifice a couple days ahead of your main fleet to mitigate the catastrophic torpedo first strike that would have demolished your battleships, allowing them to get some distance, start firing, and get out of range before the torpedoes can fire again. Alternatively, if you have PD fleets, make them do their job and send them in first. Much more safe and also double duty to absorb the first hits and stop the torpedoes after the first volley. Just keep in mind that you have to think and decide on all of this in the very few seconds you have, especially before the enemy armies land on your valuable planets, because once they land, it's pretty much over. Especially since the battle happens on the edge, your fleets will naturally gravitate towards the center of the system, retaking the starbase and forcing the armies that just landed to stay on planet after it finishes the ground battle, forcing the planet to be forcefully occupied for a while. It may be even worse, since maybe the enemy's disadvantage in fleets is redirected to an advantage in armies, allowing for completely impossible to retake planets, as the enemy sends a comically large amount of armies and this practically unstoppable jump snipe maneuver. On single player, thankfully only the unbidden can do this. In multiplayer though, your only option is to simply get good, more specifically by separating your big and small ships into different groups and then setting them on different hotkeys by pressing Ctrl plus number for each control group you need. This would completely remove the need for you to waste time manually looking for and selecting the specific fleets necessary to counter. Now this is when both you and your enemy have jump drives. What happens when only your enemy has jump drives? Be it from killing a dimensional horror, triggering a fallen empire, or simply by just rushing them. If we follow the exact same simulation as before, then we're goddamn sure counter jumping is not an option. So you have two actual options. Either force a base trade by going into enemy territory with the intention of inflicting the same pain, albeit at a slightly slower pace, or to the side of the jump to kick them out. Keep in mind, splitting your fleets here to both attack and defend is a terrible idea. The enemy will see it and defeat your split up fleets one by one. Defeat in detail is not something you want to enable, so you have to choose to either attack or defend. No half measures. Attacking has the obvious downside of being slower in inflicting economic collapse, because if you don't have sufficient resources in storage, it might lead to problems where the enemy will simply jump back after the snipe to try and delay your advance. It may seem like a small move, but let's be real here. You can't just split up your fleets to take territory faster anymore. You have to stack everything together to prioritize not getting destroyed one by one. It's not like the enemy needs to defend everything anyway. By simply positioning in inconvenient locations, they force your fleet to reroute to advance. And this is enough to simply bankrupt you, as it would take way too long to kill them. Not to mention the very likely possibility of one of their fleets still ravaging your space while all of this is happening. Not only stealing your space income, but also shutting down any hope for any new ships from being rebuilt to the front line. Defending has the downside of, well, being too damn late. By the time you're back, the planet's probably forcefully occupied by a lot of hostiles. You either have to bombard your own planet, devastating it, or simply bite the bullet and land your own armies. Not to mention, this is also assuming the enemy even makes this an option, as some army types just deal so much collateral damage that engaging them at all in these counter sieges is 100% gonna demolish everything on the planet, including pops, of course. Also, while this is happening, your peripheries are probably getting taken over as well. But there's not much you can do, as the enemy's speed on paper matters not, as teleportation is pretty much impossible to maneuver against. Okay, so this situation looks pretty grim. What kind of preparations do you need to actually prevent this from happening in the first place? Well, without jump drives yourself, the options are very limited and only work to slow down the enemy. First is to have planetary FTL inhibitors on all of your planets, and crucially, not have hyper relays on them. Jump drives warping into a system with an inhibitor will not be able to use any of the hyper lanes. But when a neighboring relay on another system is taken, then suddenly there is a way out of the system. If this is spread out to taking your entire relay network, your planetary inhibitors are all useless. Worse yet, the enemy has a way to quickly reposition in your territory using the captured relays, accelerating your demise in an ironic twist of fate. The second way to slow down jump drives is to just have a lot of assault armies, both in space and on very important planets. The armies on planets will give you crucial time to react, while the armies on space will allow you to have the option to either counter-invade with your fleets or retake your captured planets. Do keep in mind though that the side effect is that you're more vulnerable to scorched earth strategies, where the enemy will simply combine a high collateral damage army with a collateral damage general, maxing out devastation instantly while killing districts, buildings, and even pops at a terrifying pace. There are always trade-offs, so you may not want to make an impregnable defense on your important planets, as that leaves you vulnerable to a complete planet scorch. If you're relying on trade, you're simply screwed, as your capital station being taken means losing all trade income. Obviously pretty bad, considering the enemy can always at any time shut down all of it in a heartbeat, forcing you to stay put while losing everything else. Or alternatively, just all-out attack and can work without energy for the rest of the war, which I may add is equally as bad, if not worse, as bankruptcy is pretty much inevitable here. The third and final way is of course to use defense platforms. They're not exactly a perfect solution as they can never disengage and worst of all, can't move. It also pulls alloys away from your fleets, but at the same time prevents a catastrophic collapse of your backlines from a parallel split jump snipe on your relays and planets by forcing the enemy to death stack jump snipe instead, which is slower. Notice how I say quote-unquote slower instead of stopping it entirely, because let's be real here, you're still screwed, just less catastrophically, allowing you to somewhat fight back. By the way, all this talk is completely ignoring the ability for jump drives to double jump. What do I mean by that? It's the astral jump action you get access to after completing a few astral rifts. You gain access to this if you have a jump capable drive, eager explorers included, which basically gives you a jail-free card from being out of position, as you can jump from anywhere in the galaxy to your own territory with a completely separate cooldown that is not jump drive exhaustion. So you can still use jump drives after this. In other words, you can use jump drives twice in quick succession, which is simply absurd. Or alternatively, you can just demolish anything that even dares to enter your territory without even having to suffer penalties from jump drives, which, if I'm being honest, even more of an insane ability. Compared to before, this is both unstoppable and also risk-free. Just keep in mind that if you're jump exhausted, you cannot astral jump, but the other way around, where you're only astral exhausted, you can still jump drive. You can even use this to counter hyperlane or jump camping by simply queuing an astral jump forward and then jump drive back to make it so that the jump drive entrance into the system is the opposite way across. Or better yet, when there's a hyperlane connection exactly on the astral jump exit, allowing you to just get into the system behind and then warp in normally without jump exhaustion, allowing you to start the battle in long range without penalties and win. Now, I'm tired of using jump drives the legit way, so let's get into the exploits. Jump drives have a lot of gimmicks, and some of them are clearly not intended. To unlock the movement black magic they provide, you must use the forbidden key, Shift. Does jumping across the entire galaxy sound absurd? Well, because it is. Select your fleets, press Shift, right-click to a system far away, and then while still pressing Shift, order a jump into a system forward. Intuitively, you would think that this jump drive is not gonna work because the destination is way too far. But oh wait, it just gave an arrow, and after waiting for a while, executed the jump. Peculiar. To make things even goofier, when you combine astral jumps, jump drives, and shift, it becomes the trifecta that allows the forbidden art of teleporting across the galaxy without restriction twice, effectively making any system in your empire a two-way gateway that you can enter and exit from anywhere. It gets even crazier though when adding the fourth and final aspect of this black magic of mobility, Shift plus right-click. Tired of not being able to defend two places at once?
There's got to be a simpler solution.
Well, fear not. By simply adding an extra step in the three-step process, you can now move across the galaxy, battle the enemy, and then jump back across the galaxy in that order. That is because the jump drive back across the galaxy is only triggered when the shift plus right-click movement point is reached, allowing you to battle first before jumping back. Keep in mind that just like the dark arts, it's very unstable. For example, recklessly selecting a fleet and then left or right clicking on a system would immediately cancel everything else in the queue. Sometimes you do want to cancel it to reposition, though you will be unable to jump back across the galaxy as the original order queue is only valid when starting from the start of the steps, not in the middle. But this is also not mentioning what happens when you add the control key. Holding control plus shift plus right click would add an extra movement order on top of the order queue. For example, you have finished the astral jump and battle step but haven't finished your business in this side of the galaxy. But you can't simply interrupt the orders already assigned, as it would disrupt the final return jump. So you simply hold control plus shift plus right click to add an extra movement order on top of the queue without disrupting the next orders that cannot be tampered with. Of course, this goes without saying, but if you master this, gateways actually become a complete joke and more of a liability, as you realize your own systems are essentially gateways that cannot be used against you, not to mention only costing one tech. Your imagination is the limit. The more creative you are with the game mechanics, the stronger it gets. As a final note, I have to reiterate that the examples I used here are very specific, with a very specific purpose. By battleships and torpedo cruisers, because it's always recommended to have a complete opposite fleet specialization compared to the enemy when having jump drives. Because if they're using long-range kiting designs, while you do the same, you're going to have to deal with positioning advantage not mattering at all. What matters in this case is not being the guy with the late hit against instant hit, or conversely, both sides use short-range designs. In essence, it's more or less just trying to counter the enemy designs instead of positioning better, which is not what you want. Hardening against disruptors, PD against torps, etc. Positioning in this case matters less, and designs matters more. But yeah, that's it. The end. There had always been this misunderstanding of jump drives being more of a defensive tool, and I wanted to clarify that it's more of the opposite. An absolutely terrifying tool for offense, not in terms of firepower, but in terms of strategy. A true tactician's weapon where combat is not necessary and creativity in execution is the highest form of power, breaking the normal conventions of warfare into a very short and simple choice for the enemy where they always lose. And that is the simple ability that broke the Stellaris meta. There are actually ways to blink or teleport within the system like what you're seeing right now. But alas, it was deemed either too unreliable or simply not practical. Black magic, if you will. Thank you to Alaya West and everyone else for the generous support. As per my disastrous upload schedule, this video was supposed to come out 2 weeks ago, but alas, here we are.